I mean, some of the people you see on some of the social medias. Do you use Nextdoor at all? That kind of sort of one that's sort of local one. I'm on that for locally. It's useful for selling stuff sometimes, or kind of knowing what's going on. But every time I kind of go onto it, there are some really stupid people out there, and some really
it's all like curtain switches and stuff, isn't it? Looking out
and the conspiracy theorists. And it's like, I mean, this whole thing, the emergency alert thing today. It's just like,
I know.
I mean,
mine didn't go off
about that.
That's it. I'm dead. That's it.
No, we had 2 out of the 3 phones in here went off, but the third one didn't.
No, my other halves did, so she's safe. I would have just perished in the workshop today.
I'm just thinking it's the 2020s versions of the kind of the 1970s and 80s nuclear war klaxons, isn't it? Basically.
It is, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
For those of us old enough to remember those old public service announcement things on BBC about what to do in the event of a nuclear war.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Which I suppose is just a follow-on from air raid sirens and World War II era stuff.
I know,
off on the wireless.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know if I've told this story before. Jamie, you've definitely heard of it. I can't remember if I said this on the sort of podcast. When I first moved to Plymouth, 2001. Yeah, 2001. The school I was teaching at was about a mile from the dockyards. Obviously, military dockyards. And what I didn't know was that every Monday morning at 11 o'clock, they test a klaxon. And that klaxon is the klaxon for, we've had a bit of a nuclear incident type klaxon. And that's exactly what it's intended for, because it's a home for some nuclear operated vessels. And there's even in the phone book, I found out later in the phone book, there's kind of if you live within a certain area, there's instructions what to do in the phone book. I mean, phone books, it shows my age. You don't get those things anymore. But basically, there was instructions. The very first page of the kind of all the phone books, whether it's the sort of home directory or the yellow pages, was basically the instructions what to do in the event of hearing that klaxon. Mm. And the homes within, I think, a quarter of a mile of it were all issued with iodine tablets as well. I was like, I knew what the klaxon was, but I did not know that there was a practice klaxon 11 o'clock every Monday, including Christmas Day if it's on a Monday. So I'm partway through a lesson. It's towards the end of the lesson. It's just before break time, which I think was 10 past 11. And I hear the klaxon go off. And it's only faint because windows were closed. And I was just like, and I was like, I was not panicking, but I was thinking, I know what that klaxon is. I don't like that I know that klaxon is, and I can hear that klaxon now. And a few of the students kind of sort of went, "It's all right, sir. It does happen every Monday, 11 o'clock." I was like, and then one of them says, "Yeah, it's just test it every week, sir. Don't worry." It's like, I was just like,
There's a few kind of old friends of mine that had worked in similar areas. And a few of the strategies that they employ is the other way around, is to have like a regular kind of tick. So there'll be like a one beep every minute or one beep every 30 seconds kind of thing. And you get so used to hearing that beep that then when there's a problem and the beep stops, then everyone it's much more easy to tune not having the beep than it is to ignore an alarm kind of thing. And you suddenly, like, if there's an interruption or the beep isn't there and people just suddenly, it's like meerkatting trying to, oh right, okay, there it is, there's the beep.
That would be, I think that's probably quite, I have visited a place where that was done. It wasn't for very long because it was kind of one of those things, once you getting used to it would be annoying.
Yeah.
But like you say, once you get used to it, it's like anything, isn't it? If you kind of live near a train track.
Yeah,
you just
tune it out.
learn to ignore. You tune it out. Yeah, or live near a motorway. You just ignore it. But anyway, enough about kind of public service announcements and nuclear, yeah,
stuff.
Nuclear ping pong. That's the best way of thinking about it. Carl.
Yes.
You're the first guest who's actually almost suggested a bunch of kind of lines of discussion.
Have I?
Yeah.
Did I do that inadvertently today when I put that post up?
Instagram post. Well, no, I mean, it saves me having to think of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, right, of course.
Just like, it's very good. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So, where do you want me to start then?
Well, Laura Kidd.
Yeah. So Laura Kidd is a musician and somebody I came across a number of years ago. She is a solo artist and recorded under the name She Makes War, and had a sort of modest amount of success with a song called Slow Puncture at the time. It was kind of just like a sort of slow, chilled out tune and stuff. And a little while ago, I happened to be on Facebook, and a chap called Rat, who used to be the guitarist in a band called Ned's Atomic Dustbin, started talking about a collaboration that he'd had with this Laura Kidd. They'd formed a sort of 2-person band called Obey Robots, and they were releasing an album. And what's been interesting about following this along for the last couple of months really is that they have really done a pretty good job of using social media to gain traction around this album. And I recognized the name and kind of got back in touch with her sort of social media stuff, the YouTube channel that she runs, and Instagram.
Which is called Penfriend.
Penfriend, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's her current persona, I would say. Obey Robots is this collaboration piece. And they did something really very interesting, which is just drumming up support through Facebook ads and other social media outlets. They managed to get their album to chart, I think, at number 20 in the album charts and number 1 in the independent album charts in the UK. They didn't survive in the chart for that long, but fundamentally, you don't get to number 20 by just selling 1 or 2 albums these days, right, in particular. And I kind of cottoned on to a lot of her stuff on YouTube, which is talking about the business of being a creative person and trying to get your stuff out to an audience. And I found that enormously interesting. I mean, clearly I'm not a musician, I'm just a chap that sort of mucks about in a workshop at the weekends and, will film a few interesting projects and chuck them up on YouTube and maybe take a good snap here and there and stick that on Instagram. But what was interesting is that, she was really sort of on her YouTube channel on a couple of videos, and I'll send you links to them actually, because I think they've got a broad appeal, regardless of your creativity, really, or what you're into. But she has some really neat tips, really, about managing your audience, really getting them close to you. And I've seen a few other sort of prominent people on YouTube, people like Peter Millard and so on, setting up their own communities. But hers is really very basic, really. She has a website that you can subscribe through. You can become a community member. I can't remember exactly the term she uses.
Yeah, she's got a particular term for it, hasn't she?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the important thing is she's got a 10,000 person long email mailing list that every time that she records something new, she tells everybody on the list that it's available and they can go and get it. And she makes her living off the back of servicing that. Now, she's spent years building it up. But I think if anybody's looking at a sort of a good way to go about, sort of managing your creative business from the ground up. And I've got friends of mine that are artists and fabricators, so they're not traditional, not makers in the sort of make a community sense. They're trying to make a living out of their work. And I've suggested some of Laura's videos to them as kind of inspiration pieces, and I think everybody can get something from it. Really, it's quite an interesting channel to watch. And if you just happen to like her music and want to buy it, that's even better. But in terms of being a creative person and sharing her secrets, she's very open about how she does it. And interestingly, when I bought their last album, I'm pretty certain it passed through their hands as well, or her hands. She does the fulfillment, she maintained, so she's like a little one-person factory in her own right, and I quite like that. I think that sort of grounds a creator in something that people that are interested in what they do can kind of bite into and essentially, get behind, I suppose.
Yeah,
being a part of the full life cycle of it almost.
Exactly. Yes. A bit like Jimmy DiResta, really, in his ice picks, right? You'll put a video up of him, grinding the ends of ice picks, and that makes you feel like when you get one, the chances are he has had something to do with its manufacturer, and that's not always the case with ideas and creators as such, to be honest. But I like people like Laura and her projects really are quite inspiring, even though I'm doing something different. Just seeing that traction she got behind an album that went to number 20 was enough to get the camera out and to start shooting a couple of shorts for YouTube and Instagram, and getting back into doing my own stuff again, I think, really. So yeah,
I came across. It was interesting actually seeing the name come up. Yeah, because obviously you put that in your kind of Instagram post earlier, and seeing that name come up, because I've been following her for a fair while now. I couldn't say exactly when, but it's a fair while. And I say I like the music, but I'm not sure that it is my sort of music. And I'm not a musician at all in any sense of the word. I own a guitar. I can't play it, but I do own one. But it's interesting. She does lay her soul out on the line for everyone to see, almost.
Yeah.
And the thought process that she goes through, I really do enjoy watching and listening to her videos, and they do give sort of real food for thought.
Yeah.
And just, like you say, that to get an album to the main album charts without a manager, without a management company, without a record company, just through hard work, slog, it's good. It's good to see, and it's good to see that kind of let's remove some of the middle people from the kind of sort of the system, so that actually the kind of creators get a fair wage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
get
agree.
a good handle on the profit. But definitely recommend. The other I have mentioned before on here, and I think actually I may have found Laura through is Mary Spender.
Yeah.
I really love Mary Spender's music. I find that much more so my style. It's slightly different to Laura's, but again, some of her videos are kind of laying out kind of on the sort of this is what I've been doing, and this is why I've been doing it, and this is where I've been struggling, and this is what I've done to overcome that struggle. I find that quite sort of inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the thing for me really is just kind of listening to a number of her tips around how to gain traction around your product, your creative output. Really, it's had me looking at my own website, strawbyte.com again, and people have been gladly providing their email address to a newsletter that I actually haven't really serviced for quite some time, to be honest. And thinking back to when I was a little bit more active, I would be posting quietly to that list anything new that I was doing in the workshop, and the feedback that I would be getting from that list alone, even though at the time it was probably only 200 to 300 people perhaps on it, was invaluable, really. And I was rather shocked, actually, that I've got over 1,400 people on that list now that I haven't really communicated with in the last 6 months. So, so I've got some time off my day job in a week or two. And the intent really of that time whilst I'm away relaxing in Cornwall really is to have a long, hard think about, and perhaps employing some of these strategies a little bit more, and not too much. I mean, I don't want, crazy amounts of growth in either interest in my, YouTube or Instagram. Oh, that would be nice, obviously. But, with any success, right, there's a sort of downside. And actually, I'm quite committed to my day job career for the next 3 or 4 years, probably, till I can get closer to early retirement, maybe. But certainly not leaving opportunities on the table is something that I'm keen to sort of to do. And actually, just hearing somebody that through lockdown recorded an album with somebody from a band that everybody knows, and then suddenly they have a big success. And it's off the back of a sort of well thought through campaign-like strategy of getting the content out to people that want to listen to it and maybe buy it. And I think for me, probably anybody else that's creating stuff in the weekends for their for themselves or their family, or maybe to take to craft fairs, that sort of thing, really, having a sort of mindset about exploiting people that know you to some extent, really. And say exploiting people that know you, that sounds quite strong, doesn't it, really? But you know what I mean. Taking people that know you and essentially just telling them what you're doing, and then either getting the feedback about it, good or bad, or then taking the opportunities that arise from that, I think really is advice that I would give anybody, to be honest. Most of what I've seen as success in the last few years really around the wayside jig that everybody kind of talks about still. Don't know why. It must be useful to somebody. And all of that really has just come from sort of good word of mouth, and really just being mindful of the fact that, people showing an interest, service them simply, and then that interest then grows into something which could, as far as the taxman's concerned, look like a fairly decent business, really. So it's, as I say, I'm not keen on making everything that I'm doing kind of super spectacularly successful, because I'm not quite ready giving up my day job in technology risk. But nevertheless, it is if you enjoy doing it and you get pleasure from making stuff for other people, really, then I think some advice there I think is really worth following.
Well, I think that one just about the kind of the email list, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I've heard this now so many times. Instagram could disappear tomorrow, Facebook could disappear tomorrow, Twitter could disappear yesterday. It's if as a content creator you rely on those, as most of us do who produce content, to share what you're doing, particularly if it's for the purposes perhaps of bringing in money, whether it's just a little bit of pocket money, whether it's a good sized business that's going to get the tax man interested. If you haven't got that email list, you're at the whim of a few billionaires.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your entire sort of content. And I think one of the things that Laura, I think, has mentioned is that Kevin Kelly's idea of 1,000 true fans. I know Mary Spender has talked about it a few times. And 1,000 is just, it doesn't have to be 1,000. It can be less if you're doing well enough. It can be more if that's what's needed. But kind of just having that kind of core audience of people who are interested in whatever it is you do, whether it's making music, whether it's making jigs for or attachments for sort of track saws, whether it's making videos, but having that kind of ability to kind of go, I want to tell these people something. I'm not going to be reliant on an algorithm that is you're pushing particular things just because it's pushing particular things.
Yeah,
it's I mean, it's been
I mean, how many of our friends have been, affected by that recently? Of a change in the algorithm and everyone's losing half their engagement or things like that.
Yes, it's yeah, I see it a lot on quite a few channels that I follow that have that are sort of perhaps outside the maker space. Really, it seems to be a sort of universal sort of comment. Really, I get to see their content because I seek it out, but they are sometimes struggling with the algorithm sort of dropping their recommendations. Really, and I it's not that I think that these big corporations necessarily owe anybody a living, right? Directly. At the end of the day, they are kind of a platform that sort of facilitates, the creator viewer kind of relationship to some extent. However, when you sort of take a look inside YouTube, for example, and through their creator insider programs and stuff, and they're constantly talking about experiments that they're running, it kind of makes you think that whilst they're being careful, right, to not disenfranchise any one community, whether it's the viewer or the creator, they are tinkering with it, and that has consequences, really. But at the same time, I've got some shocking videos on my channel, really, that I wouldn't even watch now, to be honest. And I think at the end of the day, it is good, engaging content, really, that is the starting point, really. And
absolutely, yeah.
And whilst I've only done 77 videos for YouTube, for example, which isn't that very many at all, and I've had long periods of having lost complete interest in doing anything at all, let alone anything good on YouTube. It must be really hard and challenging to keep something going week after week, month after month, with good engaging content, really. And fashions change, right? At the end of the day, there's all these newer guys coming to the platform, really, with their own ideas, and some of them are going to gain traction quickly, some of them are not, and it is an interesting space to be in, really.
Well, I think the thing that a lot of people might forget about these kind of things, though, is that like Google and, of course, YouTube being an extension of Google in that sense, their entire platform they're an advertising company. They're not a search engine. They're not a video platform. Their existence is purely to sell ads. It just happens to be that they are the most common search engine and the most common video platform. So their whole reason for being is not to make sure that you get the content you want to see. It's to make sure that you get fed the ads that they want to feed you. So while it would be lovely to think yes, Google will listen to us, and if we curate our own stream of what we want to watch on YouTube, that will be succinct and standard moving forward. It's just not the case, because they want to feed more people more ads, so that there is always going to be that change that increases that diversity of their ad revenue.
And that's been a thing for forever, isn't it? Right? I remember a quote from Douglas Adams years and years and years ago, where he was talking about ITV not being in the business of making TV programs because they're in the business of selling advertising.
Yeah,
they just use TV, and this was long before the internet was even ever dreamt of.
They use TV programs to fill the gaps between the adverts.
Absolutely, yeah. And
but it's to capture the attention, isn't it? It's their methodology is to capture people's attention and to keep the attention of the people on their channel or their particular social media. That's the kind of aim, and anything that keeps eyes on that media form is always going to be promoted and pushed.
Yeah, exactly. So so I couldn't wait to monetize my channel, really, to be honest. I didn't think twice about just kind of hopping on that. But the only thing that was really quite irritating was that when I started my channel, they literally moved the goalposts after my first video really came within sort of 90% of the YouTube Partner Program entry criteria, and then suddenly only did 400 watch hours of watch time and 1,000 subscribers, and I think I had 150 at the time, which I thought was pretty decent, and just couldn't figure out where the other 850 were going to come from, to be honest.
Yeah.
Who were they? I've run out of friends for a start. There's nobody at work I can tell. Not that they're interested anymore. They've watched a couple and probably unsubscribed. So. But it's interesting, really. I've not really had a particular plan around my channel. It was always about trying to give back, things that I knew that other people or knew how to do, or I'd looked up, or I'd, because YouTube is the biggest search engine short of Google, really. So when I came to insulating a single brick garage and trying to find the best way to do it, I was all over YouTube first, and really found absolutely nothing that was useful enough. Lots of people doing stuff that even I thought looked a bit dodgy, to be honest, and probably wasn't good advice. And then sort of set about really trying to do it properly by kind of approaching insulation manufacturers. And once I'd got hold of a couple of them, Kingspan, I think, was the most useful company that I approached. It quickly dawned on me that the technique that they were encouraging me to follow wasn't something that I'd seen anywhere over YouTube before, which was to sort of batten out the inside of the wall and then apply, PIR insulation to the inside and skin it with something, or alternatively use insulated plasterboard, which is how I started. And then the video idea came from that. And, 75,000 views later, it's still going strong. People are always seemingly interested in insulating their garages, not for workshops these days, I might add. It's for
extra bedrooms, games rooms, offices,
gyms. That's the latest comment today, I think, really, was somebody looking to turn their garage in a gym. I live on a new build estate, which was the reason why it was so easy to do in my case, right? It's a brand new garage, right? There's no previous occupant to have to clear his kind of bad material choices, no wall anchors that you can't get out, that sort of thing.
4 different types of screw.
Yeah, exactly. So round our way, it's all gyms, pelotons, yoga studios, and hairdressing salons. And I've had all of them get in touch and ask for advice. During lockdown, I think people just assumed I was furloughed, not thinking that I was working for one of those organisations that didn't get to stop work. I had dozens of offers to go and quietly, do their garage for them. And oddly enough, they thought I would just chuck it all in the back of the van and drive 400 miles to do it in most cases as well. So, that project was now further nearly 4 years ago. We've been in this house for 5 years now, so that was the second year that we did the installation project. So I'm really surprised at the longevity of that video.
It's evergreen. It's evergreen. It's going to keep.
It is, yeah.
While
absolutely.
there are people with single garages that are single brick and uninsulated, it's always going to be seen. That'll keep going.
And I've been working quietly over the last few months, really, on doing some follow-ups to it, really, because there's a couple of people that I can't think of the guy's name off the top of my head now, but there's a couple of YouTube channels that have done a pretty decent job of explaining blow by blow, not just what they did, but all of the decisions leading to it. Somebody like Charlie D.I. White, for example. He does a pretty good job, I think, really, of kind of setting out his stall. Clearly in most cases, right, any DIYer can just tackle a job one way. You don't get to do it twice. That's the key thing, really. But he does a pretty good job of setting out his decision thing. And that was something that I never really bothered doing in the video. I just filmed what I did, put it up, and people have kind of followed it. But that's not the only way of achieving the same outcome. For me, the constraint was the fact that my garage was only 3 meters wide, and every centimeter I took off the inside wall to put the insulation in was less space for tools and making to take place in. And I was moving from a wooden summer house that was 3.5 meters by 2 meters, and I didn't want to get left with just that space in a very warm and cozy box that had been done to building regs, right? So there were some shortcuts taken really in terms of the thickness of the insulation, but of course I checked with building control about what the rules were, and as it wasn't going to be a space ever used for sleeping and it was never going to be heated, then fundamentally I could really get away with anything. The other thing that I did was very mindful of the fact that where my parents live in Dunstable, it was an estate built in the 1960s, and just about every semi-detached or link-detached house now has taken their garage and converted it into a living room. And this was something that was happening in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid. The thing for me, having gone into those spaces really, is that it always feels like a converted garage, feels like a converted garage. It's not a room of a proportion that makes it feel like a living room or a dining room or an office or whatever. And so I was really very keen when I was kind of doing my garage conversion to a workshop to leave it looking like a garage from the street, because the garage complements the house, and I didn't actually particularly want to give away that there was something more interesting going on inside it than a car. But for 2.5 years, I think we stuck with the notion that if the planners turned up or whatever, some complaint was made, I could quickly move the tools to the back of the garage and park a car in it and say, look, it's a garage, clear off. But that's changed more recently. I need wall space. That's my big challenge at the moment, right? So I've replaced the up and over door with a roller shutter, and I've half blocked off that space in front of the door to give me a little bit more wall space. That's some stuff that I've videoed that I'm busy trying to edit and get out as videos. But I mean, I did make one mistake. One of the things that I did make a note of before coming on really was that in that series of videos, I did the walls, I did the roof, and I replaced the floor. Well, put a vinyl floor down, and all of those videos performed quite nicely in the first year. But I had a professional roofer be very, you get rude comments every time you put something up on YouTube, right?
Yep.
But this guy wasn't just rude, he was actually bob on right as well. So he called me a hapless amateur or some ridiculous comment. Told me that there was no way I should be showing people how to insulate the roof space of a garage that way, and pointed out that the thing that I hadn't considered was, and I always get this phrase wrong, it's condensation that forms inside insulation. There's a term for it, interstitial condensation, I think is the phrase. And because I kind of made it up as I was going along. And that's the truth of the matter. I put one layer of insulation in and thought the job was done. And then I had a load of insulation left. And I thought, well, I could do a second layer. I'll go and do that. So battened out underneath the second layer, put the second layer up with an air gap between it. And, that is inviting, apparently, moisture to condensate on the inside in that gap between the two layers and rot your roof till your roof falls in and kills you. That's essentially the allegation made by the roofer. And I think he was desperately keen for that to happen as well, just to prove him right too. So I took that video down, and it's honestly taking me. So that project, just doing the roof, took me 3.5 weeks of me being constantly up a ladder, sweating my proverbials off, really, in the roof space in the middle of summer, trying to get this insulation up. But it's taken 2.5 years of slowly going around and correcting the mistake. So I'm just at the stage now where I can perhaps revisit that whole project and start to do it again. And one of the challenges, like I said, is that I've already done it. So I'm going to be talking about it after the fact. I've not videoed half of the fixing because there's only so much standing up a ladder that any one person can watch. Really, 10 minutes of it would be enough for most people. I want to try and keep that down to maybe a 20-second clip of me just replacing some insulation. But yeah, so I've come up with a clever wheeze. Really, it brings me on to the other thing: the films of Wes Anderson. So I don't know if you watch Wes Anderson.
I'm not. I not. He's not someone that I kind of. I mean, I'm hopeless at remembering kind of names of directors and things like that. Anyway, but there's been a lot of people on Instagram lately doing kind of reels in the manner of Wes Anderson.
Yeah, there's a whole genre. There's accidentally Wes, I think is what it's called. Where people take photographs that have accidentally captured the sort of the shots that Wes Anderson tends to look in his films. But now the reason for mentioning it is the fact that as a storytelling device, Wes Anderson uses scale models in his films to explain things, like in the Steve Zissou film with I can't think he's in it now, to be honest. But anyway, it's the sort of submarine one. There's a model of a submarine that shows how the submarine is laid out. And in the Grand Budapest Hotel, there's a model of the hotel that kind of explains how the hotel works. So I was watching Grand Budapest Hotel last year, and I thought, hang on a sec, right? I've insulated my workshop one way, and that's the only way that workshop's going to ever be insulated. I'd have to move to do it again somewhere else, and that's not happening anytime soon. And I know my other half's watching this upstairs, so she'll be rest assured that we're not moving anytime soon to a bigger workshop, because it won't be a bigger house. It'll be a smaller house, bigger workshop. That's what I've got in mind. But yes, having watched that I suddenly thought, actually, if I built a scale model of my workshop, I can insulate that as many ways as I like, really, just doing it as a 1/10 scale model. So that's what I've done. And I've been busy working out now how to film it with GoPros and other small desktop cameras, like webcams, for example, to try and get shots that mirror the shots that and I know this sounds overly complex, really, but I think it would be quite interesting.
I think it sounds very cool, yeah.
The task of so I can show in real life what I did, and then in the pretend model workshop, give you the sort of 3 or 4 options that I considered that I discounted, and actually show you in physical form the reason why those options don't work. In particular, losing too much space on the inside.
Yeah, and I think as well that would also give you an opportunity to perhaps test that roofer's theory as well. If you've got, I don't know, like a tea light and a spoonful of water or something to create some moisture in there and see how it behaves differently. Have a bit of the scientific method on it.
Exactly. So that's what I've been working on lately, is really just trying to complete that scale model, really. It seems like some sort of fool's errand at the moment, right? Because I feel like I can't start on finally wrapping up these kind of follow-on videos to that insulation workshop series that I did, including the reissued director's cut, if you like, of the roofing insulation.
DVD commentary on the end.
That's absolutely, where we can change the ending so it's not a complete disaster.
Hand shot first.
Exactly. So yeah, but it's got me interested again in making models on trays as a kid was just what we did in our household growing up. My dad was a carpenter and joiner, and his father was in the Royal Engineers and was a maintenance guy at Lang's headquarters in Boreham Wood, I think it was, or certainly near Stanmore, which is where my grandfather lived. And they had hobbies galore between them. Everything from making chuck gliders, out of balsa wood, and then doping tissue paper to form the wings. through to gluing Airfix kits together. I mean, my ceiling as a kid was just full of Airfix kits suspended on fishing wire from, and you know, I mean, the great thing about that was my granddad was prolific. He used to make them literally every month and bring them round for me and my brothers. And there's only so much room on the ceiling of a small bedroom that you share with your brother growing up. So, you know, when you run out of room, you take them down and then blow them up in the back garden with fireworks or, you know, some other crazy stunt.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that kind of caught on really. And when I think back, somebody asked me at work the other day about, you know, they were talking about their children getting into kind of resistive materials at school and them coming home from school kind of wanting to do it at home. And then they were being obsessed with the sharpness of saws and knives and so on. And it got me thinking really that, you know, I was trimming the sprues off of Airfix kits with a scalpel, probably age 9, you know, not with my parents' permission per se. They just happened to be in a little cigar box in the back of the dining room, and you'd go and away you go. And I just think, you know, going back to all of that, really, making models and having that crafting thing was just something I grew up with, really. So, you know, putting this scale model of my workshop together has just been a joy, to be honest, really. You know, cutting everything out, getting it to scale, working out what the proportions need to be.
You're not doing it with matchsticks then?
Sorry?
You're not doing it with matchsticks then?
No. But that was something that I was into
the same, yeah.
as a kid. Matchsticks, making carts out of clothes pegs that you broke up and took the spring out, and then you had those kind of funny shapes that would make wheels. That was another thing. String pictures, you remember those? You know, where you bang the nails into a bit of I don't know what it was back then, plywood perhaps covered in cloth, and then string stuff. Yeah, did all of that. Macrame I could do. I was taught to knit by my aunt. So and you know, loved needlework at school. I just thought, you know, all of my middle school was great. We had a sort of rotation between pottery, needlework, cooking, and woodwork. And literally every term you swapped. So you did 6 weeks, or every half term you did 6 weeks of one, swapped to the other. And that continued for the 4 years that I was at Priory Middle School in Dunstable, and I absolutely loved it. You know, to the point whereby I can sew pretty well, to be honest. I think, even as a grown up,
it's such a useful skill to have as well, though. And I think, especially for people who look like us three, you know, it's one of those skills that we should have. You know, and I think it's often seen as one of those, you know, kind of like you either get the folks who are like quite happily, you know, stitch themselves back together but can't put a button back on their shirt.
Yes.
Or the ones who are, you know, kind of, why should I do that? You know, you just think, well,
yeah, normally with a misogynistic note after it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fascinated with all of that. I love learning new techniques. That's what's got me into 3D printing. That got me a CNC. I've got a laser cutter now, like a proper CO2 one, not one of these diode ones that will choke you to death in your workshop.
And blind you, because they're not
and blind you,
enclosures.
absolutely. And you know, all of these techniques that I've hoovered up just allow me to sort of, you know, create things that come to mind now. I think that's the power of it all.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, years ago, I used to be quite heavily involved in a sailing club, and they had a problem whereby the flags that they used to mark the buoys when they were doing dinghy racing used to fade really very quickly in the light, and the reason being is that they kind of made it out of spinnaker material. It's very light weight nylon, so there's not much stuff to it. It's dead thin, and whilst it's color fast, you know, a material that thin is just going to degrade in UV light really quickly. So whilst you can get some really bright spinnaker colors, you know, they would be flat, boring pink shapes after a season's worth of use. And I said, oh, you know, I'm sure there's a solution here. And I went away and had a thought and thought, well, you don't see high-vis jackets fade that much in UV light. Really, they seem to be quite
Yeah.
stable.
Yeah.
So I got a couple of extra large high-vis jackets. Got a seam ripper, ripped all the seams just to leave me with panels, the back panel mostly, and I also took off the mirror, the reflective strips as well, and then made up 14 flags for the sailing club out of high-vis vests, and I think they lasted like 9 or 10 years before they were finally retired. And again, the fact that I could see a purpose of just the material alone, and I'd been taught as a youngster how to undo mistakes, really more than anything, to be honest, and to rip all these seams, get the material, sew it together, come up with these kind of funky flags, and that was probably late on in my adulthood, and kind of was probably the catalyst to get me connected back into making. I think that was probably one of the first things where I thought, I could create something that would be useful to someone else from just a sort of a leap of imagination, I suppose, really, more than anything, seeing the value of the back of a high-vis vest, right? And interestingly, actually, high-vis vests, and this is another thing that I've learned really, is that people complain about raw materials, really, and I've made a couple of videos on this already. So when I made my drill stand, right, I went out to try and get some timber to make a stand for a fairly heavy 13-inch pillar drill. I mean, it needs 2 people to lift it off the ground and put it on anything, right? And I was really thinking that I'd need to get some solid bits of wood to make the legs, a nice big thick bit of timber to act as the top and stuff. And I went and priced it up, and really found that actually it was going to probably cost about 40 or 50 quid in materials alone to make the thing that I had in my head, which was kind of the bare minimum to stop the thing from falling and hitting the ground, as the way I saw it. And then I just happened to be in IKEA, not a favourite haunt of a maker, by the way, my IKEA. But what was astonishing is that their Beckvam kitchen island, which is made out of laminated beech, and in sectional sizes, which are pretty decent. I mean, they were bigger than this cross-sectional area of the timbers that I was looking to make my legs out of. But the whole thing, I think, was 49 quid, 10 quid short of the budget that I'd priced up to get my local timber yard to sort of, give me the material. And I was maybe, I could have done it in constructional timber, clearly. But, I mean, I wanted to make something that felt like a bit of furniture because I thought that was well within my capabilities. And I wanted to stretch myself in terms of doing all the joinery. But actually, when it came down to it, money was a bit scarce, and I just thought, sod it, I'm just going to go and buy and hack an IKEA device. But it was actually an IKEA kitchen island. But it was actually that lesson from making the flags, because I went out to get the material that they make high-vis vests from a fabric supplier, and by the yard basically. And for what I needed, I think it was going to cost me I think about 35 quid for a couple of yards of this material. It's about a yard and a half wide. But 9 high-vis vests came in at under 10 quid. So the material made into a high-vis vest turns out with a vest costing less than the material used to make it. Now, I guess there is a economy of scale operating there,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that, the fabric supplier that's got a roll of high-vis material in his inventory probably doesn't have many people like me coming along asking for it, so it's priced accordingly. But even so, that's really got me looking at the world ever since really slightly differently. And it's why I like, channels like Keith Brown's, for example, Rag and Bone Brown, which is all about reuse and recycling and stuff like that, is that people see in other materials, not the thing, but the underlying stuff.
Yeah.
And going back to sailing, I mean, centerboards on older classic dinghies like Enterprises and mirror dinghies. You remember mirror dinghies?
Or the name. I've never been a sailor, but I'm aware.
No, they built one on Nationwide in the early 80s. That's where I can remember it from. That's what kind of got me into sailing in the first place. I think that and Swallows and Amazons. But yeah, so all of those classic dinghies were made with some pretty exotic materials which were commonplace in the 60s and 70s when dinghy sailing kind of had its heyday. And I've still got some boat building friends that will go out and buy 1920s, 1930s dining tables to get the teak and mahogany out of the table to make centerboards and rudder blades for classic dinghies. And that again is kind of a mindset that's kind of stuck with me really. I see raw materials in all sorts of stuff. To be honest, I've become a little bit of a magpie in terms of getting stuff into the workshop to kind of reuse in that way.
Yeah, you have to be careful, otherwise you end up like me with kind of a shed full of stuff to potentially use, but you can't actually get in there to find all the stuff because it's a bit too full.
Yes. I was in the workshop this afternoon, and I've got a box. I don't know, it's 30 centimeters by 40 centimeters, a foot, 30 centimeters deep, full of casters. You know,
I found my stash of casters the other day as well. Some from chairs and some from something else.
And it was this. I was looking for some wood glue the other week. I remember buying some of that Tight Bond Thick and Quick, and I was doing something that I just needed a very quick glue up because I was just wanting to get the thing done that day rather than having to clamp it up, leave it overnight, and come back to it the following day. So I went hunting for this thing, and literally everything I pulled off the shelf in the workshop was a random bag of stuff. So, I found the glue in the end and finished that little task that day. But I've probably spent the last 2 weeks really kind of looking in all the dark places of my workshop now. And one of the things that I've got an abundance of is casters. I've literally got probably 60 or 70 individual wheels and feet that I've kind of robbed off of furniture and the stuff that you get left over once you've put a set of shelves together for your house. So I've had a really good sort out, to be honest. I've got like a wheelie bin full of stuff that's going to go off recycling. All of this old screws that are in odd sizes. I remember thinking a while back. I don't know whether you ever had this, right? You kind of take a screw out of something and you think, oh, that looks interesting. Maybe it's a pan head or a bugle head screw, and you think, oh, that's interesting. I'll keep that, and you throw it into your screw box, and sure enough, yeah, you can think of a use for it, but you want 4. You only ever saved 1, so you end up buying 4 because you can't get 3. You can't get 3, and you end up with this perpetual screw, which is just the ghost of an idea. Really, that's all it is in the end.
I've talked about it on the podcast before, but I did the same thing. I dismantled something and saw these. There was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 of these screws. Oh, that's perfect for a lot of the time when I'm trying to do bits of 3D printing or trying to fix something thin to something thick. Perfect. I want to get a set of those screws. Finally tracked down what they actually were, and you can only buy them for about 56 quid for 1,000 at a time. So I want maybe a box of 100 to last me for the next 5 years. I don't need to spend that amount of money on that quantity of screws, but I can every now and then it'll just reappear, just like 1 or 2 of them that I've put in strategic places to remind me down the line.
Yeah. And to be honest, I'm the worst person to be influenced by something you see on YouTube as well. So a couple of years ago, I'd watched a history guy video about the history of screws, and he was talking about the sort of dust down they had in the US between Phillips and Henry in Canada in terms of how to put a vehicle together, and it kind of ended up with the Phillips head standard and the Henry screw head being kind of pitching head to head with car manufacturers in North America and stuff. Anyway, after having watched that, right, just about every YouTuber that's got an axe to grind about what's their favorite screw head type kind of started to come up. And so Torx head screws kind of leapt into my YouTube viewing, and then I suddenly thought, hey, there's an approach to screws that's going to solve all of my problems. And of course it doesn't. It just multiplies them, because you end up with the same amount of screws in the same sizes that you had as PosiDrive, but now in Torx head screws. And then basically what I realized is that the selection process is really whatever bits in your impact driver.
In the driver, yeah.
Yeah. So if I've got a Phillips PosiDrive bit in my impact driver, then I'm going to be looking for PosiDrive screws, right? I'm not going to be looking for the Torx 20 bit to put in there. And then in the end, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to have to sort of rationalize everything. So I've kind of now got it boiled down to a set number of sizes in a set number of head sizes, PosiDrive 2 and 3s mostly, and then that's it. No drywalls.
I've gone the other way. If I need a black screw, then I know I need a number 2 Phillips bit, because that's the drywall screws, and that's purely for aesthetics. If I need short but kind of like washer head screws, then it's going to be a number 2 Posi, because they're the only decent ones that you can get that are, half-inch or 3/4, kind of number 8, number 10 for like decorative purposes again. Absolutely everything else is Torx.
Oh, wow.
My other half uses my tools probably just as much as I do. And Torx is so much better for someone to be putting something together in like up hanging underneath something, trying to put a stupid fastener in a stupid place kind of thing, or if like she's built a couple of sheds and things and extensions to bits and bobs and bits of furniture and things, and she's so much more comfortable just using like impact driver and a Torx bit. If the bit fits, then it works great. So I've just got a selection of all the Torx sizes, and then it's really easy. That you don't have any of the because there's none of the cam out, so you don't need to have as much force on the driver. That's purely the only reason for switching everything to Torx. I just didn't become a fan well enough. I can see it ticks all the boxes. It has some other advantages as well, Torx as well, because if you can't find your Torx bit, you can stick a hex bit in or an Allen key and get it just about tight with that. Or at worst, just a straight bit.
A straight bit, exactly. But no, it never really sort of worked. Like I say, I've just been lately just trying to sort of rationalize stuff in the workshop. Now I think a little bit more like my dad did. I mean, he was a jobbing carpenter and joiner. He didn't have a screw in every size imaginable kicking around in the garage. He kind of knew what screws he used the most and then stuck with those. And then, for everything else, you ground the tip off a screw to make it shorter and drill the pilot hole. That was kind of his mindset. And I've kind of gone with that a little bit lately, because, I mean, it's not like, my interest, my increasing interest in making, if you like, has resulted in my workshop every time I go out in it getting 1 square meter bigger, just because I'm more enthusiastic to get out there and make stuff. It's a finite size, and I've literally filled all the little Sortimo kind of boxes now with stuff. I'm just now having to sort of dial that back a bit, really, and also stop obsessively trawling Amazon for parts as well. Try and make
the recommendations down the bottom as well. When you buy one thing and then you go, I can get that.
Oh yeah. And the worst store is Sourcing Map on So sourcing map do kind of screws and other fixtures, and they're not, the quality is not great, but it's not not bad, because they've got like everything you can think of. Like I bought some washer head hex type screws to make as part of a kit of a table saw pointers that I kind of did a video about the other week. So I ordered a whole bunch of those from Amazon just because they could come the next day and people were looking to place orders. But yeah, as soon as sourcing map kind of know who you are, then their entire back catalogue of stuff is revealed to you, and it's a hard thing to sort of say no.
I bought a few things from them, and the other one that I tend to buy a lot of my fasteners from is Bolt Base on eBay.
Yeah.
They've got their own website as well, which is equally as dangerous. But for things like M3, M4, kind of weird little screws for 3D printing stuff, they're phenomenal because they've got absolutely everything in all the really weird sizes. Ordering like M2 and M2.5 for tiny little projects and things.
Yeah.
Super small fasteners.
I mean, I know that there's, in terms of stuff that you'd end up having to assemble at home, right? Because everything now comes in a rectangular box, regardless of its real world dimensions, right? So some assembly required is a mindset that we have to get into in modern life, right? If you can't manage that, then you might as well give up. Really, to be honest, it's going to be a hard life for you if you can't put a set of shelves together. But I get really frustrated when, if you like, some engineering considerations have been considered over and above the practicalities of trying to put the thing together in someone's house. I get so frustrated where you come to put something together and they supply you with like 4 different Allen keys that all look roughly the same sort of size. Like you say, they might be 2mm, 2.5mm, and 3. To my old eyes without my reading glasses on, that's the same size as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me to the point whereby actually on a couple of occasions I've half given up on assembling something just because I'm tired of having to work out and find the M2.5 version of the thing, because that's what's required. And I appreciate that they've probably gone through fixings tables and bolts tables and all of these kind of guides on pre-stressing their nut and bolt joints and stuff to for the loads and stuff. But come on, these days a stainless steel M3 nut and bolt, providing it's physically going to fit in the thing you're trying to build, is going to be almost as cheap as your M2.5 nut and bolt. And it's not going to leave me floundering around looking for that Allen key that I had in my hand 10 minutes ago that I've just put down and can't find again. So yeah,
very much with you there. So that is, I'll admit, that is the downside of using Torx fasteners everywhere, is having to have the T10, 15, 20, 25 and 30 kind of in a pack together, so that you can do that kind of the test with the screw first, right? That's the one I need.
Yeah, I do remember a few years ago. I mean, I trained as an engineer. I used to take apart computer systems when they used to fill, large rooms and not do very much with no more than 25 users. That's how I started in sort of engineering. And, I remember having a set of Torx screwdrivers in my kit because a lot of the stuff that was coming over from the US, 20 megabyte drives that were, the size of shoe boxes. They needed Torx heads to get the tops off so that you could calibrate the heads and all of that kind of stuff. And I remember when I quit that job, these tools kind of stuck with me kicking around the house. My tumble dryer broke down, and having logged to the call already, but not wishing to be without the tumble dryer for a while, what had happened was that the drain pipe had sort of come loose and was floating around in the back and had sort of worn through as the drum was going around. So all it really needed was a bit of self-amalgamating tape around it just to patch it up until the fella could come out and do a proper repair on it. So I patched this thing up, and I remember the guy, I can't remember whether it was Bosch or Mealy or whatever it was, I can't remember the brand now, but the service engineer came out. He was absolutely agog that a homeowner had a Torx head screwdriver and could take his machine apart. He seemed to, I think, take possession of every machine that Mealy, whoever it was, had sold. And he was really quite offended to find my sort of bodge job inside the machine. and pointed out to me that the reason why they used Torx head screwdrivers was to stop people like us from getting inside washing machines. And I had to point out, having come from a sort of computer manufacturing background, that actually, no, the reason why they use Torx head screwdrivers is that when you've got a mechanical screwdriver in the factory, there's no cam out and you can get these things in fast. That's why they've chosen them. It's got nothing to do with the fact that you want to keep the customers out the back of your machine.
They can
There's
be
no security.
very quickly calibrated to a set torque value.
Exactly.
From a very fast install.
Yeah. So we had this interesting conversation as he reluctantly replaced this pipe in the back of my tumble dryer. So, and went.
My tumble dryer, we've got a tumble dryer. Can't remember what brand it is now, but we had a similar thing of it, kind of erroring out, and it was the same old story of having done computer repairs for a couple of decades and things. It was there's got to be some reason for it, and apparently it was a very standard common problem with this particular thing. Once everything gets a little bit warm, there's a thermal cutout in the back, but because they know it's a problem, you literally spin the machine around. There's 13 Torx fasteners on the back. You just take the panel off, and there is a big red push to make button in the middle of the back panel. So you take the back panel off, you push the button, and then you put the back on, tighten the screws back up, and that resets the whole machine.
I know, it's nuts, isn't it?
They know it's an issue.
It's nuts.
I was very tempted to just mark out where it was and just drill a hole to be able to push the button from the outside, just to save me having to take the screws out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I
it's
would.
kind of funny.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I learned, so I used to work for McDonnell Douglas, who at the time in the UK were largely renowned for making information systems. They bought several companies, a company called Microdata, and they were a reseller for digital as well. So their fax systems were resold by McDonnell Douglas to hospitals and police forces and ambulance people and that sort of thing. But I got trained on the bench initially to sort of repair stuff that was coming back into the workshop from customer sites and send them back out. And again, it's a sort of lesson learned mindset thing. I think really is that about 95% of all faults are caused by one or two common problems on the stuff that I was repairing as an engineer. It means nothing to nobody these days, but McDonnell Douglas used to have a terminal, an RS-232 terminal called a P4. And I can tell you, if that thing won't turn on, it's guaranteed to be CR103, which was a 100 microfarad capacitor on the power supply board. You replace that, and it visibly, it was shot every time you open these things up. It was the most stressed component in there. You just put it in you replaced it with a slightly higher rated version, and you probably get no trouble for the lifetime of that device. Which, of course, back then, right, nobody foresaw, the PC taking off when I got started in IT. PCs were what people used to use to do Lotus 1, 2, 3 spreadsheets and nothing else. You didn't network them. God, no.
That's what I started on. Yeah.
So
Lotus
terminals
1, 2, 3
were the
1.
future, and smart terminals were just terminals that gave you the text in blue, really, if I remember rightly, rather than green or white. And had, function keys that did things other than, put tabs in when you were using a word processor. But it was that, and that's kind of stuck with me. I did a video where I repaired my my planer. So I've got a Metabo HC260 planer. It's sold under a whole variety of brands. Record Power do it. I think it's the PT260 with Record Power, and I remember putting that video up where the thing was dead when I bought it. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was shown to me by the guy in his house working. I think he must have had his foot on something or his finger poked in something, right? Because it turned out one of the interlock switches was shot. And it took me probably about a couple of evenings really to sort of go through, apply my sort of engineer's diagnostic kind of mindset, really go through and test everything one by one, take switches out, bench test them, put them back in and so on. Eventually I found the fault, made a video about replacing it, and the video was really intended to show people how to fault find. It wasn't about fixing my planer. It was just a skill that I developed as a result of being a bench engineer for a computer company for so many years, right? So I just thought that would be quite interesting. And I remember the first few comments that I got from people is that, you shouldn't be repairing your tools. That's a dangerous machine. That would have your hand off, if you're not careful. And what are you doing going in there with a screwdriver and fixing it? And I just thought, well, for a start, it's mine. Yeah. Secondly, the spares are readily available, so it's not like I'm sort of, having to break into NASA to steal parts to fix this thing. Right?
And it's not like they've gone the extra mile and put security tugs or pin tugs.
Absolutely. And the bloody manual has an exploded diagram
parts list,
of the entire thing with the parts list, right? So once I I did feel a bit cheesed off about that particular comment, really, because I think it made me think that perhaps the world's turned and we've got a mindset of people now that think that something is useful whilst it's serviceable, it's repairable so long as you've got a warranty with it and somebody can come in a brown coat and fix it for you, and then effectively it's scrap the
Once
minute
the plastic
it breaks
box stop
and
doing
it's
the
outside
magic
of warranty.
things, stick it in the bin, buy another one.
And and I get really quite frustrated with stuff that breaks around the house, in the workshop and stuff. I want to be able to repair it. I expect to be able to repair it, and get really frustrated when the right to repair is taken away.
Absolutely. I think that's one thing that I found frustrations more and more of things like that, trying to apply, like you said, like a diagnostic methodology to something, and the downside of potted components that are stuck to their own will. You can't get in and check and change things, or the boards are completely conformally coated, so you can't test anything properly or things like that, and you can't apply that rationale to something, because what might look like a failed capacitor, you can't test it properly unless you start chiseling off epoxy and things like that, and then you can get at it, test it, go, oh well, that's actually that's failed. You replace the capacitor, and then next thing something else on the board goes, and you can't then diagnose the problem because there's some proprietary bit of stuff that you can't access, or you can't diagnose, or you can't. That's where it really starts to frustrate me.
Yeah. I mean, these days it's just sort of power tools, really, that I'm kind of fixing. But I mean, I've tried fixing an iPhone, and then decided that a 24 megapixel camera on the next model along was probably a better route than trying to fix my cracked screen. Although I did have, and this is a sort of shout out to Samsung. So I used to have a Galaxy Note 20, I think it was, whatever, a couple of years ago, and I dropped it outside a Screwfix and broke the screen, and kind of booked a repair with them. And I was absolutely staggered, right? Back when I was an engineer, right, getting a soldering iron out on site and fixing something really wasn't uncommon, right? And lots of customers were quite okay with it, really, despite the fact that it was still leaded solder back then. So they probably wouldn't be quite as happy with today's health and minds health. And there was no heat-proof mat either, like you would expect to have on a soldering station these days. But this guy turns up in this little van, and it's all done in the back of the van. It's incredible.
Oh wow!
Parks outside my house. He kind of gets out the driver's seat, climbs in the back. It's a VW Caddy, a bit like the the little sort of day van type setup.
Yeah.
A little bench in the back and a couple of windows. And he sits there. He's got all the gear. He's got the UV light to cure the screen. I was really very impressed, actually, to be honest. About 45 minutes outside my house, handed back a phone with a. And the other thing that was interesting was that they extended the warranty not just on the screen but on the whole phone by 12 months.
Fantastic.
Which is not the same as what I got the last time I turned something into Apple and got that fixed. You barely get 6 months on the repair there, to be honest. But it was the fact that it was taking place outside my house, that this Samsung's entire repair business model now was about it being convenient for the customer and then having the engineer turn up at your house, sit in a van and fix it for you. And it was a pretty wet day as well. So, I mean, you had the roof, rain on the roof. It's all properly set. It wasn't asking to bring a power lead in to take that back to the van. It was very cleverly done.
I think the thing is that, like you said, that's partly the optics of it as well, is because you can see it's being done there and then. It's not being taken off to some wizard in a box somewhere who'll just do some magic and bring it back. You can see the thing happening. You can see it's your phone that's coming back to you. It's not a swap out or stuff like that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that.
But there's an interesting twist in my experience to this right to repair that I had on my list of things that I might talk about if it came up. So I will.
Yeah.
Which is brands. Brands don't actually want you to repair your thing with anything else or enhance it in any way, shape or form with anything else other than things that they make. And one of the pitfalls of selling on a platform like Etsy, which I do, and I do a decent amount of business on Etsy each month, to be honest, and it's something that I wish to protect. So Etsy have a pretty strict, they take no crap, basically, right? If you infringe any of their terms and conditions, you're off the platform. There's no comeback from it. It's not like YouTube where you get 2 strikes or 3 strikes and you're off. If you infringe the rights of a brand, you're off straight away. And this led to a little bit of a scare about 6 months ago for me and many other people like me that make accessories for tools. I mean, I make my guides. They're not strictly speaking for any one particular tool, but off the back of that, I've made the little things that block up the hole on a track saw, right? So arbor hole covers. But you have to be very careful about how you list those parts because the brand owner can call a strike on you if you imply in any way, shape or form that the item is a Bosch part or a Festool part or whatever. So you have to be very careful about how you word these things. And the thing that they really dislike is, and this is particularly the case in the 3D community, 3D printing community as well, the brands are now going into repositories like Printables and what's the other one that I can't think of? Thingiverse, right? And getting models pulled off of that for replacement parts for their tools. Because they're claiming that the copy of the part is infringing their intellectual property rights. And is it Louis Rossmann? Has done a long rambling rant in the recent
He's good at those
last few months, really, about brands exercising their rights. And where it makes no sense to me at all is where the product has been discontinued and the parts inventory that they once held has been exhausted. That's where things really sort of irritate me slightly. And unfortunately, I think, mostly they kind of leave small fabricators alone, really, in terms of manufacturing non-OEM parts for tools. But you have to be so careful now when you set yourself up. So if you want to make, I don't know, you've got some sort of super whizzy idea about how to make a Bosch circular saw, easier to use, cleaner, safer, better dust extraction because you've redesigned the dust port. Unless you put that up on your sales channel as I don't know, dust port for Bosch model number, right? Or compatible with, that's the better term, compatible with Bosch part number, etc. Then, you know, Bosch is, and I'm using Bosch as an example, not because they've called anybody out, but it's just because it's a big brand. But the lawyers, a big brand lawyer could look at that and turn around and say, well, you're trying to pass off the thing that you make as something that would otherwise carry the Bosch logo and be sold in a parts inventory somewhere. And that's been a concern for a lot of maker sellers, people that have got ideas about how to improve their tools, and you know, and to sort of enhance them, and that's a little worrying, really. The flip side to that, and I have this problem and challenge myself, is that I design stuff that the world and his wife are more than willing to rip off the moment I let it see light of day on a social media platform, or on a sales channel like Etsy. And you know, it took me a little while to get over myself on that. Really, I used to get really quite angry, and I even made a video about how crap some of the copies of my tracksaw guides were, out of sheer frustration with the whole thing, really. But what I did, and this is something that actually I did want to recommend, right? So I don't know whether you knew this, but the British Library run a program for startups, and it helps. So it's the BIPC is this scheme that they run. It's often run in local libraries near where you live. So it's available in Northamptonshire, where I'm based, and it's readily accessible in our local library. But it's lots of other counties, county library services have picked up this scheme. And basically, it's a sort of one-stop shop for people that want to start businesses, and people with intellectual property that they want to go and figure out how they can stop people from copying it, really. And it's a really useful service. So if you are in the business of coming up with an idea and then trying to get somebody else to part with their money for it, right? It's actually quite an interesting way of kind of thinking about what you're doing. And the sort of thing that I've learned, right, is that your idea is yours. You can protect it in a number of ways. You can protect the design, how it looks. You can protect its innovation. That's what a patent is. They're very expensive, and you lose patents just by not paying enough money to the patent office to maintain it as well. So that's a worry. But the best advice I got really was just to sort of make something and start selling it, right? And then at the end of the day, you can protect the thing that you've made. You get to name it once, and once you've named it, you can call that as a trademark with TM. You can register that trademark and get your R in a circle. And you can protect your design rights, so you can stop people making it look like yours, if that's what you so desire. And that was a super useful avenue. But through that, I kind of got to understand a little bit more about how other companies kind of exercise their intellectual property rights over accessories in particular that are made for a particular device. And off the back of that, it's kind of shifted my model now, really, where when I'm thinking about stuff that I can make with my 3D printers or my laser cutter or on my CNC, if it's for my own use, I can make anything that I like. If I'm going to make the item and thinking of selling it, then what I won't do is I won't make a copy of an existing part that a manufacturer offers. I'll only offer parts that enhance the tool in some way, make it safer, cleaner, or just decoratively nicer to look at. And then that's it, right? Because everywhere else, really, it's the sharks are circling. Really, it's kind of a dangerous land, really.
Yeah, and I mean, you can kind of understand that, especially with something like a power tool and a replacement part, because, like you said, you know, from a risk point of view, there, you know, you've got someone who might download a replacement part or download the STL of a replacement part, and then the print quality isn't up to scratch for what the OEM part would be. And you can sort of understand the manufacturer's point of view from that side of they want the safety of their tool to be to their spec tested standards.
Yeah.
Versus someone with a printer that's not particularly well calibrated or old damp filament that's gone through it, or something like that. Not enough infill or whatever. But
I mean, you touch on something that's kind of dear to me, because my day job, I'm a technology risk manager for a large transmission operator of electricity. You might say national, perhaps. They operate grids all over the place. Not wishing to name them. So I'm a technology risk manager there, and that sort of risk management side is really quite important for anybody starting out in business. I don't think it really matters whether you're making coasters that you're going to sell at a craft fair or letter openers, for example, that sort of thing. Being mindful of your liabilities as a maker, I think, is something that I've learned quite a lot. And having good public liability insurance helps, and making sure that when you've registered for your liability insurance, you've properly classified what it is you make as well. So you're not just insuring yourself against the process, which might be woodworking, for example. I make things out of wood, right? It's very easy tick box. But to work with your broker or a brokerage and fill a more detailed questionnaire out so that you can list everything that you make, you get a much more tailored quote. And interestingly enough, when I went in to get my business's insurance or insurance for my business, and just said woodworker / cabinet maker, because that was the thing that was listed, the insurance quote came through, I think, 40% higher than had I gone in and listed specifically the activities within the business, and in particular the things that the public were going to come into contact with. So things I make, the outputs, small furniture items, signs, things made out of plastic, CNC things, and so on. The minute you get boiled down to that, then essentially you end up already in that mindset of risk assessing the thing you make and performing, fairly. It doesn't have to be detailed, really, but reasonable searches to ensure that the thing that you're selling doesn't have to comply with some piece of legislation. So if you're making wooden letter openers, for example, you better pay close attention to the knives legislation in the UK. If you want to sell them, you need to make it look not like a knife. That's the idea, really. But it's one of those things, really, that unless you're sort of if you're going to make and sell stuff, really, you've got to think about these kind of extra steps in your thought process in order to get stuff done. And like I say, being mindful of other people's intellectual property, not copying, checking to see whether the design is in the public domain before you copy it. That's a good idea. All of those steps really are kind of necessary things if what you're trying to do is not necessarily make a living, but certainly turn over a small amount of money to fund your interest, really.
The business side of being a maker has the potential to be quite a minefield for those who don't go in with the thought that there's got to be more to me than just making something and selling it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And but I mean, I learned business at school. There was a thing called I don't even know whether it's a thing now in schools these days. It was Young Enterprise Scheme back when I was a sprog. We all were given us seed money of £100 to set up a tuck shop. Basically, that's what most kids did with a Young Enterprise Scheme. We made the school that I went to, Queensbury School in Dunstable. The year that I went through, we started off thinking gardening services would be quite a good idea, and then we just didn't like the public. I think it's probably a fair assessment of that.
Very fair, yeah.
Did the tuck shop thing at school. I mean, that's what everybody does, right? And then started making soft toys, teddy bears, in fact. just because one of the girls in my class, Nicola Shorter, her name was. So there you go. She gets a bit of a shout out. She was really into needlecraft and made soft toys out of, that sort of plush, furry stuff that soft toys are made from. And she had some patterns for an elephant and a teddy bear and a few other kind of things. A little blob that was easy to sew together. It's a bit like a potato with eyes. And we sewed these things up and sold them, and actually did a pretty decent job of flogging them. But again, I think that was really the sort of all of the ideas, because the scheme itself didn't want the public to be harmed as a result of loads of kids charging about the countryside wanting to be Alan Sugar, right? Leave all of the harm to Alan Sugar, can't we? And his so all the ideas were vetted quite hard, but it was kind of something that stuck with me really when I started setting up a couple of kind of small hobby businesses later in life. Really, that actually sort of scout out the market, who you're going to sell to, decide how you're going to do the thing you're going to do, how much you're going to charge, and then when you start thinking about what your fixed costs are, then something like getting half decent insurance that's going to cover you when it all goes Pete Tong. That's important too. So, but of course, if you are sitting at home thinking about starting a making business, I would just say go for it. The government will give you £1,000 you can earn before you can even start to pay tax on it. So you can, I don't know, crank out some coasters and a cutting board or two from your little workshop, flog them down your fare, and keep that turnover below 1,000, and you won't have to pay tax on it. How about that? That's quite neat, isn't it? That's only for the UK, by the way. If you're listing in Australia, it may well be very different there. But in the UK, that was my first year's money, right? It was done under that scheme. I didn't have to. My tax return was really easy. But it's within all of us, really. I think we can all take advantage of that. I think.
Yeah, that's a good kind of. It's that classic, isn't it? Just go for it, do it.
I think so. People will buy it.
Yeah.
And those that don't will give you good feedback. That's the thing. It goes back to what I said originally when I was talking about Laura and her channel, right? With her list. If she puts out something that isn't going to work, then frankly, they'll tell her. And the same thing, if you're stood at a market stall and nobody at all is interested in your cutting board, then you can at least find out why. If they've picked it up, handled it, and put it down, you can, and if it's because the guy next to you is selling them at half the price, and then that's something to go away and think about then again, isn't it? I suppose.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes the feedback is more valuable than the sale itself.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, all the best ideas I've had, if I think about all the things that I make and sell, all the best ideas that have been incorporated into them have come from customers that have asked something a bit odd. They've asked a question because, in some cases, because a lot of them have bought my guides off of seeing them featured in Peter Millard's videos. They've got them home. And despite the fact I send out a really well-designed set of instructions, which has, fun fact, right? The instructions that go out with my Traxor guides have illustrations that I did myself based on photographs that I robbed from Andy McClellan's Gospel of Handyman's video where he reviewed them. So they're actually his hands that I've traced in Photoshop in the instructions to give me my illustrations. They look really good, very good. But anyway,
does he know that he's a hand model?
Yeah, I have told him. And you better remember, because there's no royalty to be paid for those.
Well, I can add him to the show notes now.
You can add him to the show notes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They do that. He'll appreciate the traffic to his channel, I imagine.
Well, it's going to be the Gosforth Handyman, no, isn't he?
Hey, I never thought of that. I've got to reprint those. Actually, that's a thought, isn't it? Have him forever remembered in a pun in the instructions that his hands appear in. That would be great. But yeah, in spite of the fact that those instructions are pretty comprehensive and take every step, some people haven't quite got what they're for. I remember some guy sending me a picture of them in use where they were not just the wrong way around, but upside down. And I couldn't understand how he'd even managed to make a cut with them that was even close to being accurate, really. But what was really interesting was that when he explained what he'd done, really, which was kind of taped them to the end, well, had found a way of fixing them to the end of a combination square, so he could sort of slide the squares in under the rail and set the thing up in one go. I thought to myself, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Right? Because I use the 2 squares rule to set my rail up for thin, narrow rips on my track saw all the time. So you set 2 squares up back to back. You separate them. One goes to either end of the rail. You get the rail set up to that mark first time. Now, if it's a normal cut, okay, you don't have to do any more. Wayside cut, you have to slip the jigs in between the combination square and the rubber splinter guard. And I thought, well, he's figured out a way of attaching my things to his combination square. So I ended up taking that away and kind of incorporating a slight tweak to the design to make that easier on my Barco squares. And now that's kind of a hidden feature of the things.
Yeah.
Only that chap that got it all wrong, me, and anybody watching this podcast now know. How about that?
Oh.
Well, listening to this podcast, should I say, if you're on a
Oh, they can watch as well.
They can do both. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all things like, for example, there's a little notch on the back, which everybody asks about eventually. I mean, you know, people say, hey, it's a little notch at the back. What's that about? And Jamie, I think you'll appreciate this, right? So how do you know when you're printing something that has to be accurate, that your 3D printer is dimensionally accurate in both the X and Y direction? And the answer to that is that you put a notch in the opposite orientation in the back of the thing that you've made. So when it comes off the printer, you can measure with calipers across the width of the ridge, which is the key dimension to make the thing work under the rail. And then you can also measure the notch occasionally to make sure that your printer is still printing accurately in the X direction as well as the Y, or the Y direction as well as the X, depending on how you've laid the things out. And that's what it's for. And again, that was because somebody had read the specification sheet, got a set of calipers to their guides and measured them, and they weren't as accurate as I was claiming. So I did replace them, and it took me a while to figure out what the problem was. I took the printer that they were made on, because everything is recorded in batches. So I know when I've sold something to a customer who's got what. And when I did the sort of diagnosis, I realized that my Prusa i3 Mark III was actually inaccurate in the X direction. And for that print, for some reason, I'd orientated the parts the other way around on the bed of the printer, and printed it all off, and it was 0.2 millimeters out. So that's these little things come from customer feedback all the time. You know, they're folk are trying to catch you out because they can't believe that you can make something that's exactly 2.2 millimeters, and of course you can't. You know, there is a tolerance in there, which, you know, when you explain that, you know, I make them to within 2 sheets of paper of being kind of bob on. It's 0.2 millimeters really if it's A4, 80 gram per square meter paper, and that's good enough, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the tip of your pencil that you use to mark the line you're trying to get accuracy against is wider than the tolerance on the guides. That's kind of how I've kind of pitched it up. But other times people turn around and say, look, you know, I do a lot of bevel cuts. And, you know, am I going to get, you know, do I need to, what's the kerf like on a bevel cut? Well, of course, you know, basic trigonometry tells you that you tip something over to 45 degrees, and the hole it's going to make in the bit of timber that the blade went through is going to be wider than it was when it was at 90 degrees. Yeah. So again, that feature was added fairly early on. Some guy said, look, you know, I'm really interested, and this was almost a deal breaker for him. It was a couple of weeks ago, and I did something on Instagram the other day with it. because it seemed to be a deal breaker for him. Really, he didn't seem to be interested in the guides unless he had a way of having them on his saw all the time. Is there a way, he said, you can make it so that I can just kind of slot them into my saw, like the Allen key that I use to change the blade is kind of slotted into the handle? And he, that's all he asked for. So I said, well, if you buy the guides and the arbor hole cover, then I don't know, maybe I can think of something. I mean, already an idea was forming in my head. So yeah, I just made a little box, printed that separately, printed the arbor hole cover that I normally sell, and then used MEK to weld them together. And Bob's your uncle. It's not the safest chemical to use in the workshop, I might add. Plumber's mate for PVC pipes works just as well. It's just all I had. I know I've got the most dangerous chemical you can have in a workshop, and it's all I have. But yeah, glued these things together, and he loved it. Honestly, he just thought 3D printing and people like us with 3D printers with a spark of interest in solving problems. It's just like the best things. And like I say, everybody saw that Instagram post the other day. Keith Brown chimed in on it and said, "Oh, fantastic idea." It wasn't my idea. It's the customer. He just posed a question. Because can I squirrel this somewhere on my TS55 and not have to worry about it? Oh yeah, if I put a little box on the side of your saw, yeah, you can do that. Yeah. So yeah,
there's definitely a lot of merit to doing that kind of thing. I think that's the key point here, isn't it? Is that it's not just the 3D printers that are so important in that kind of thing. It's the understanding of the problem or the question, and then being able to model something that fits the bill as well.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I suppose that's where people like like yourself, who, if you're uploading things to things like Printables or Thingiverse, you've got that kind of that displacement of your skill to allow someone else who doesn't have the modeling skills but does have a 3D printer to then still solve that problem.
Yeah. I mean, those modeling skills were terrible when I first started, honestly. I mean, my biggest disappointment with getting a 3D printer home was the fact that I couldn't get it to do anything that I wanted it to. Sure, I could download any Dungeons and Dragons or Games of Thrones character, anything from the Star Wars or Marvel universe, and print that in a heartbeat, right? That was dead easy. But, having an idea in your head and then figuring out actually how not to make it, because a printer does that for you. The slicers are so cool. I mean, they do an excellent job of just taking a physical CAD drawing or CAD model and slicing it up and getting it to print. And these days, with Prusa Slicer in particular, which is what I use mostly at the moment, it even tells you when you've got it wrong, when the overhangs are too big, when the orientation's not right, and so on. So it's almost idiot-proof. But the skill that is so hard to master is turning out a decent model and designing with 3D printing in mind. You need to inform yourself more about things like tolerances than you ever have to with wood, right? I mean, if you drill a pilot hole that's 0.5 mm too small, right, your modern hardened steel wood screw is going to go through that like a knife through butter. Maybe one in 20 times it will split the end of your work and you'll have to glue it back together and find a bigger drill bit. But with 3D printing, right, if you want things to mate and fit together, you want things to fit around a physical dimension in the real world, you have to understand tolerances like you've never had to understand them before, really.
And materials as well, something printed in PLA and something, the same model printed in something like ABS or ASA is going to, the material shrinkage and things like that.
But I mean, I think for me, I mean, I make a decent kind of. I've started a decent business based around 3D printing and CNCing and laser cutting and that sort of thing. But I'm not by any stretch of the imagination, an expert in any of those. I'm not a sort of Maker's Muse or Thomas Salinger kind of guy, right? As far as I'm concerned, my 3D printer is no more important than the impact driver that I used to drive screws in the workshop.
Right?
It's just a tool. I squeeze the impact driver it turns, screws goes into wood, I'm happy, right? And if it won't go in, maybe I've got the wrong driver perhaps, or maybe the battery needs charge. There's a small amount of adjustment that you need to make in those tools to get them to perform optimally. And I very quickly decided that, for example, going down the Ender route, for instance, just wasn't going to be for me. I wasn't going to get a printer home and then have to print upgrades for it to get the thing to get the quality that I wanted. So I saved up for an extra 2 months really and went with the Prusa i3 Mark III. And even then that wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. But fundamentally, like you say, Jamie, you just understand the materials that you're printing with, the constraints within the design. You look at what other people that are serious about getting accurate parts off their printers are doing, try those few things out. It's not a world of possibilities there, right? It's a handful of key tips, and then stick with it. I mean, for me, these guides that I make, the reason why I think they are successful is the fact that I very quickly arrived at a level of consistency off my printers where I could have them running all day long and the parts coming off would be identical to within 10 1/10 of a millimeter at least, probably 5/100ths of a millimeter mostly, and that wasn't done by kind of obsessively worrying about is it sat on a paving slab, is there any sort of resonant ringing, does the window have to be opened or closed when it's 22 degrees outside? None of that really. I just set these printers up, just calibrated them once, and I just check every part that comes off and only calibrate them when those parts are out of tolerance, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I've only just started printing in ABS, and that's only because I've got a Bamboo Labs X1 carbon recently.
Nice.
And it's got the charcoal filter on, so they don't stink quite as much as trying to print ABS on an open printer would be. And that's so high temperature filaments really now are the thing that I've started to explore a little bit more, because then that opens the door to other opportunities really. The product can be nearer things that are hot. You can make parts for car enthusiasts and not have to worry about them melting when they leave them in the sun on the dash of their car, that sort of thing. So that's where I've started to sort of explore. And I've got this little mission over the next month or two really to put one new material through my printer each month really. So it's ABS before Christmas. I've done some carbon stuff lately. Try to hang a door from a ceiling. I know this is going to sound a bit weird really, but I thought, carbon fiber nylon would be okay to hang a homemade a door from the top of the door frame. Right? There's a video if you subscribe to the channel, right, and you want to see what I'm trying to do and how I failed, it's going to be in that video, right? But I thought hanging a 15-pound door from or 15 kilo, should I say, door from the ceiling using 3D printed carbon parts would work, and realized it doesn't. They yield. Essentially nylon stretches over time under load. It's far better in compression, which is what everybody else uses it for. But that was my month with carbon fiber nylon, and valuable lesson learned. I've moved on now. I've got that ticked off. I've got parts.
Have you tried the carbon fiber PLA for that? Because that might actually work better in that instance.
Yeah, I have. Carbon fiber PLA was the first time I ever got a clog in my Prusa that resulted in me having to take the entire thing apart and learn how to disassemble and reassemble the hot end. But no, that I think that the issue that I had with my early experience with some of these filaments was essentially not realizing that hardened nozzles are the way to go, and with abrasive materials you need to be replacing them far more often than I was prepared to do. So I've kind of I've moved to
hugely
nylon.
ironic considering that how cheaply you can buy nozzles as well, especially the brass ones compared to
I know, but
anything else.
I mean, you know this. I mean, they are an absolute bugger to get off. Once you've put several spools of filament through a nozzle, right? It's not wanting to yield off that.
And I do a
hot
lot
end.
of stuff with PTG as well, and that tends to just like gum the outside of the nozzles up. And
So PETG was my go-to filament for quite some time. But my issue with it really was keeping the moisture content low enough to get consistent print results with it. That's the thing. And I hate having to dry stuff. That's an extra step. Because in my life, right, I've got my day job, I've got evenings and weekends, and this factory that operates in my spare bedroom, right, churning out hundreds of orders a month really for customers. And you very quickly grow tired of adding new processes to your already kind of process heavy manufacturing business. So the idea of having to constantly dry PETG out was just not where I wanted to be. So I've deliberately avoided doing too much more with it. But the only thing that is really helpful for us, you're making clips to hold cables to hoses, for example. It's got some nice elastic properties, which are
really
handy
does,
for that. But like I say, I mean, the thing that I feel like I'm most known for these days is Strawbyte Workshop as a maker of things, rather than perhaps the YouTuber and kind of community member. Perhaps, I don't know. Maybe that's just my perception of things, given how things have taken off.
Does that bother you at all?
Sorry?
Does that bother you at all?
No, not at all. No, not really. Because I feel like and this is why YouTube's taken a bit of a back seat for me, to be honest. Because as things have taken off in the getting my little spare bedroom to crank out dozens of hundreds of items each, I've enjoyed every moment of that, right? And I've just managed to kind of satisfy, I suppose, thousands of customers, right? I think gone past 10,000 customers. I think I've made more than 10,000 sets of the Traxor guides now. The little fix for Makita plunge saws, where it doesn't have the depth stop kind of indicator that Festool tools have got. I think I'm over 1,000 saws fixed now. Really, that's a half-shot video that's nearly ready to go. Actually, I can't decide whether to put that out next week or the week after. But so I'm quite that is enormously satisfying. And people like Peter Millard and Keith Brown and Gosforth Handyman, they've all featured my stuff on their channels at one time or other, and their videos actually turn out to be they're sticky, right? So people do go back and watch them. Lots of people use the discount codes that Peter has on his links. So I've been, but most of my traction now is off of the social media platforms. Really, it's capitalizing on selling platforms, and I just don't get upset about how much these platforms charge you for being on them either anymore. It used to bother me. Etsy was just absolutely raking it in off my hard work. But actually, Etsy do a blinding job of reaching people that would never see my stuff. And as a consequence of them developing a reach for me on that platform, I'm not making as much per item per sale, but I'm making something, and I wouldn't have got that customer any other way. And the same is true regarding eBay as well. So I ran a little experiment last year on eBay in October for a week. And actually that worked out quite nicely. I just need to I've now got the problem of managing inventory on multiple platforms. So I just need to fix that problem. So I manage it on my website, Etsy. If I can solve eBay, then Amazon will follow off the back of that. And again, even though Amazon charge a fortune to distribute anything that you make, and I probably won't get anywhere near the margin on those items, they will have a reach to customers that I can't possibly get to. And that's the key thing. And then added to that, there is a little bit of exposure that I've got on Instagram and YouTube, and through my friends on YouTube like Peter and Keith, their help in the past, just keeps things going well enough, really, for me to feel like that's successful. So I get lots of people asking where the next video is, and my challenge at the moment is just a log jam of time. If I'm having a particularly busy month making and selling stuff, then I'm going to be mostly doing that in my evenings and weekends. And I feel as challenged with that situation as people that watch my videos and want to see me make more as well. It's one of those kind of, because if I'm not, the way I make videos is I go into the workshop and do something, film it, edit it, and bung it up on YouTube. So not being able to go into the workshop, film something, right, that's the first problem, right? I haven't got enough time. I'm spending most of it really trying to run a small manufacturing business. And again, I'm probably a fool to not capitalize on the reach that I've got on YouTube in terms. But I don't want my channel to be like some others that you see, where it's just about what they make and sell, and that's it. And I'm sure that's valuable to people that are in the business of making and selling, but I didn't get into YouTube really to try and gather that audience. I wanted to try and just share the useless knowledge that's in my noggin with people that probably don't know about something like how to fix an X-carve, or how to use pop rivets properly, or not, as many in the comments pointed out on that video.
I think as well there's an element of, because you often hear people saying about that there's you do a search for one thing and you get 20 different people doing it 20 different ways, and I think that there's an element of truth to that, but there's also finding a person that explains it in the way, that it might be that you've got 20 people explaining the same thing the same way, but sometimes one person might just gel with you a little bit better, or explain something in such a way, use the right metaphor or analogy that just breaks through enough for it to click.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at what Stuart Matthews is doing at the moment on proper DIY, right? He's got a very formulaic show, and that's not said meant to sound like it's a bad thing, right? He's had a thought about what a good instructional video should look like. I remember him saying because I'm a Patreon member of his channel, so I hope he doesn't mind me kind of mentioning something that he told us all as patrons, really. But he did a video about how to wire a 3-pin plug, right, which was 11 minutes long. And he was a little bit disappointed about how unpopular compared to his other videos that video was by comparison. So clearly it wasn't landing with a perhaps a casual viewing audience, right? I mean, wiring a plug, 3 minutes. Don't know, you can get that in a TikTok video and perhaps do it in an entertaining way with a soundtrack, and that would satisfy somebody's interest in British 3-pin plugs if you happen to be, I don't know, in Malaysia or wherever. But actually, for somebody that wants to replace the plug on their kettle because, I don't know, they've damaged it in some way and they've got the thing from Amazon and they want to get the two things, he did a really good job of showing how it should be done, talked people through it in a very engaging way. And sure, it probably didn't land well compared to his other videos, but for some, it's going to work. And my fix for the X-carve, for example, the only people that are ever going to watch that video are people with X-carves with the same problem. So that is probably the one, that video has got the highest engagement of any video that I've put up, because people that find it watch the whole thing. And in terms of other measurements of engagement, like likes, comments, I think just about everybody that's watched it's liked it. Everybody that's watched it's commented on it, because it's, suddenly they've had this epiphany about how to fix this motor lock issue on the standard configuration, because it's not documented, not well anyway. And that's why I made the videos, and I just kind of, the purpose of the channel for me for now is really just to sort of scratch that itch, give something back, and find that way of explaining something that maybe works, like you say, for the handful of people that just like a sort of beardy English guy with a soft voice explain how to fix something or put insulation on their workshop walls.
And sometimes you just need that thing that grabs your attention and takes
Yeah,
you away.
I will admit to not enjoying editing if the requirement of editing a video is to up the pace. You know, if the first 6 seconds of my video has to have 14 cuts in it in order for somebody to watch it, they can jog on and go and watch somebody else's video. And I know that there are people like Matt Esley, for example, that do an excellent job in terms of cutting his videos. But I know from some of the comments that he's made about why he doesn't post videos so often, his challenge is that he's set the bar in terms of the efficiency of his editing, so that he actually has to do it that way, or it's not the Matt Esley video that people want to see. So I'm comfortable with my pedestrian editing, right? I just bank on the shots being set up right and being in focus, and even then I can't get that right half the time. So
that's why we just stop editing this.
Yeah, set the bar low, make it easy.
Yeah,
better to get stuff out than to be on a hard drive.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, one of the best videos that I've got on my channel, the one I enjoy watching the most of my own, is the unedited version of me putting together a kind of factory-made summer house, which was my first workshop. So I edited it all together, and so I know that my other half is watching, because she's just got Alexa to turn the lights back on. So if you're watching, Tina, cheers. Thanks very much for that. I mean, I can't do it because otherwise everybody else's lights is going to come on or go off. So yeah, it's that unedited video of me putting the thing together, because it was literally all of the time-lapse footage that I'd got from having assembled it. So Tina and I kind of painting stuff on the first day, me making jigs and kind of getting everything sorted on the second day and stuff. And for me, I just love watching that because it's slow, it's interesting to watch. It's got that it's no commentary on it really. It's got that sort of sound of things being screwed and banged together and saws going off and so on. Yeah, and it's like 55 minutes worth of footage, and it's great. And interestingly, it's the video that got me over the 400 hours of work time, really, because when I put that up, people, for some strange reason, did want to watch the whole thing.
There's a hell of a lot of merit to that kind of thing. I can't even think what they call it now, but it's quite a popular concept. Well, no, it's a popular conceptual kind of strategy for people with any kind of neurodivergence, of like body doubling. So while someone else is working, you tend to be more productive.
Yeah.
So people will often put, if they want to concentrate on doing a block of work for half an hour or an hour or something, they'll often put on something similar of that way. I think that's where a lot of that kind of slower paced, longer form content is super valuable in that sense, to have someone just working away in the background and have those kind of sounds of
I know it's
productivity.
Funny, isn't it? A top tip for anybody that's got an Amazon device that turns on when you call its name is you can ask it to play cafe sounds if you want a bit of company when you're working from home. So I used to work from home a fair bit before lockdown, just because my job was a little bit more mobile back then. And occasionally I'd find myself in a Starbucks or a Costa Coffee working. And I used to achieve levels of concentration while working in coffee shops that I could never do at my desk or at home with it quiet. Yeah. And this cafe sounds that you can get off the Amazon device is a godsend. I have it on all the time. It's not so bad at the moment because my other half is at home, and so there's other sounds in the house. But I find that sort of extraneous sound kind of aids concentration. I think
it's almost looping us back to the beginning there with that kind of the background sounds to tune out.
Yeah,
and I think there is that kind of if things are too quiet, it's very easy to get distracted by the slightest little thing. Because if you've got sounds that that kind of reflect that brain searching out for distractions kind of thing, it sort of forces you back into task.
My other half would say I've got some problem in that regard, because like when the
go on, Andy, add another one to the tally.
When the cooker goes off, say dinner's done in the oven, I'll go out and I'll take the stuff out of the oven and I'll turn the oven off, and it will still be beeping. There's literally like 10 seconds where I can hear the beeping, and then after that it's gone. I can't hear it anymore. And the same with the bathroom fan. So I stop hearing that. And the worst thing in the world, really, for me in the workshop, right, is I've got a record power chip extractor, and it's a 3/4 horsepower thing, 700 watt thing, and it's quite. You switch this thing on, it doesn't bother the neighbours. That's why I bought it. But I can have it on if I'm doing like multiple. I'm going from the bandsaw to the table saw to the router table. I'll leave it on as I'm moving the hose between those tools as I'm going from one operation to the next. If I do that for more than 10 minutes, I can stop hearing it. And I've walked out the workshop a couple of times and just left it on. I'm just unaware. And it's even worse with ear defenders on if you're, stuffing a. So I've had to sort of put a light just inside my door of the workshop that is on as I try to leave, that indicates that there is something on in the workshop over a sort of trickle current that indicates that I've left a tool on, because I need that prompt. I've got a little I've modified like a key code door lock thing, so that it indicates that the door's open if somebody's on the outside, and on the inside it tells me that the door's safe, because something happened about a year ago, and this is quite innocuous, right? So I didn't kind of end up losing a limb and lying bleeding on the floor. It could have easily been that. What happened was that Tina came out to the workshop with a cup of tea and couldn't get in, and it was raining, so she got wet until she banged on the door until I opened it. And then it kind of occurred to me that actually Tina didn't know how to get into the workshop. Wouldn't have been able to perhaps recall the code without going back into the house and finding it on the fridge. And I suddenly thought, oh shit, if I could be kind of, in serious trouble and people could be stuck on the outside, not able to get in. So I made a stick basically, which I cable tied to the handles, so that when it was in the unlock position, so the handles kind of one way or the other, it showed the end of the stick had open on the. So I've got a window in the door. It's important to understand. There's a window in the door. The stick comes down. The end of the stick can be seen through the window, and it has the word "open" on it, so that when Tina comes out with a cup of tea, she can just open the door. Or if I'm lying on the floor bleeding, and I've asked Amazon's device to find Tina, she can get in and plug up the gaping hole in my arm, or whatever it happens to be, And
I'm guessing there isn't a corresponding one when it's locked to say closed, check the fridge.
No, but it does actually. It does when it's in the up position. And I must admit, I need to do a video on this, or at least do a little bit more on Instagram.
Yeah, you should.
Because in the up, because I nicked all these ideas from the railways. My dad was a model railway buff, and he used to design his own signalling for his little train sets, really. And of course, all railway signals have boards that blank the signal when it's in a particular position, right? Especially the light control ones. I just copied that idea. So when it's in the up position, you can't see the word safe. That's hidden behind a little screen. And the thing that swings up from its hidden position when it's down is the word locked. So from the inside, I can see whether I'm safe or the door's locked. And from the outside, you can see whether the door's open and cups of tea can come in. So, yeah.
That's definitely worth a video. That's got to be.
I mean,
worth
Do you think? Oh, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But also, it's just reinforcing to our kind of like American friends that us Brits are entirely fueled by tea. All of our problem solving and inventions are tea based to start with.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that there was no tea grown on the moon meant that we didn't get there first. I think is the. But we found India and the West Indies, as a continent. I think really as a result of looking for tea. So we'll leave the moon to the Americans, and we'll stick with the East India Company and India and safe mods to your workshop. Although that could possibly be controversial, perhaps, maybe, I don't know. Let's not go there. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to attention grabbers then, shall we? At least
the things that have been grabbing attention, it's that kind of sort of time of the evening.
Yes, I was looking forward to this. But we've kind of taken a couple of them already. So we've mentioned Laura Kidd, and if anybody grew up in the 90s listening to Ned's Atomic Dustbin, look for Obey Robots on your favourite streaming service, and you've got Ned's Atomic Dustbin with a female voice, and it's amazing. So that's been the only thing that I've had on in the car for like 3 months now, and even the thing that I bought last week that I played this weekend has been kind of relegated to the door pocket, and Obey Robots is back. And like I said, we mentioned Laura's videos earlier. They're mostly video essays. The two that I strongly recommend is How to Get an Album in the UK Top 20 Without Selling My Soul. The first one. And the second one was My Secret Weapon as an Independent Musician. That's where he's being interviewed by a guy in the US. He's being interviewed by a guy in the US and talks about using a mailing list as a way to directly contact her fan base. And that's, as I say, that was the game changer for me, realizing that. Couple of other things, right? It goes without saying, New Yankee Workshop is on YouTube now.
Yes,
pretty much the entire back catalogue, or at least I thought it was, but they still keep releasing episodes every month. So YouTubers can go home now, right? Norm's got it covered, right? Just about every project you can imagine has been done on his show. And what I like about them, right, is that actually, if you wanted to start a YouTube channel tomorrow and copy a model, the New Yankee Workshop is pretty much it, because despite the fact that there's a lot of detail, he doesn't hang around, right? Essentially, he'll explain the operation, you'll see it done, he's off onto the next operation. I found that really quite refreshing, I think, to see. When I think about some of the videos that I've made and some of the other videos that I tend to watch that are kind of more like lifestyle magazine shows rather than making videos, right? To go back to the stuff that I remember when I was a young adult trying to do things around the house, that's my thing.
I used to love watching New Yankee Workshop. I haven't seen it for years.
So there's another channel that's re-emerged. So Tim Hunkin, he's probably been mentioned perhaps on
he has.
But so I don't know whether this was him or not, right? But me and the other half, we like going to Southwold Pier fairly regularly, and you've got the Under the Pier show on there, plus the Southwold Pier sign, and there's a fountain on the pier. They're all Tim Hunkin installations. And I do remember seeing this kind of wizened old man kind of pottering around inside the in the arcade. I don't know whether it was Tim or not. If it was, and I missed the opportunity to say hi, that was an opportunity lost, because he did a show on Channel 4 called The Secret Life of Machines, which again is available on YouTube via his channel. They've all been remastered. And when I was a young engineer at McDonnell Douglas, that was like the only proper engineering type show that was on TV. We'd lost the Great Egg Race, that had gone. Anything else that was showed the serious business of putting something together, that was on Discovery Channel probably, or just not done very well at all, like Changing Rooms. And
didn't last very long. Like Beat That Einstein. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to love that. It was a great show.
As a kid, I used to love shows like Jigsaw and
How To.
And there was another one that was on the BBC that was kind of all about how inventions were made. Can't remember what that was called. Eureka, that was it. so when he started up on YouTube, he started re-releasing these things, and then he did his Secret Life of Components. And the first video I think got practically no views. I mean, he slipped onto YouTube, no ceremony, and I sent him a note, really gushing over how much of a personal hero he was, and how much, as a young engineer, I looked at people like him and thought I can see myself in that person. And so, mucking about with screwdrivers in the back of computers is probably a good thing for me to be doing as a job. But not realizing how successful as an artist he was, and the fact that he went to art school, he wasn't a trained engineer, and his art installations are mechanic in nature and just stunning pieces of art, and his animations as well, I just think are amazing. So I've been obsessing over his Secret Life of Components all the time. And annoyingly, he did one on screws and fixings, I think, nuts and bolts, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The other week, and completely stole an idea that I've been gestating for 3 years. and yeah, taught me a lesson about actually making the bloody videos and putting them up, rather than thinking about them for 3 years and then having somebody steal your idea.
But if you were going to have anyone
anyway.
else steal your idea,
Yeah.
would you rather it be anyone other than him?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And to be honest, he's welcome to it. To be honest, I'd give him all of my ideas if he could just make them. That would be fine. I wouldn't even want any credit or royalty for it, really. I just love the way he presents. And it's something that I can watch with my other half, whereas half the rest of YouTube, really, she'll leave the room for, to be honest, because there's just blokes like me talking about wood. And there are just two final things I want to mention, really. So if you're looking for something new to watch that's been around for a while, perhaps a little bit hidden, there's a guy in the US called Eric Strebel is his name.
Yeah.
Now, he's a product designer and maker, and he's got a channel which I've been going through at some length, because for me, what he's showing is not just the stuff he can crank out, but he's lifting the lid on how to manufacture things for manufacturing's sake. Not as it's not like some other channels where they're showing you how to make 1,500 chopping boards in a weekend kind of production. He's taking it back to ask the question, what is the best way to make something? And here's a technique that I will use to make a prototype to prove the point. And, he's obviously plugging services like PCBWay a lot, but he's at least showing the jump off point as him as a maker, designer into those services, because he only wants to be resin casting one prototype, then handing it on to a firm in China to make the rest. And that to me sounds like a winning formula. And I've been lapping up his videos for a while.
Yeah, they're good.
And then the final thing is there's a guy called David Hillowitz. He's got a channel called David Hillowitz Music. Now, I'm a bit of a music buff. My first video on my actual Strawbyte Workshop channel is actually me getting a Novation synth groove box thing out of its box and playing a tune with it within 15 minutes, right? I thought I was going to be a music channel when I started on YouTube, and kind of built a workshop and got distracted for the last 7 years. So, but I'm still kind of plugged into music making. I'm not very good. I understand a little bit of music theory. I can make a synthesizer sound like a pop act from the early 1980s. I can copy all of the Depeche Mode back catalogue quite happily all day long and be happy.
Can you still do the dances?
So no, I don't do that anymore. It's a dodgy hip. But David Hillowitz is an interesting channel. He's a trained violinist. He does lots of experiments with sound. He used a video recorder to process sound to get an aged feel to some voices that he created on a synth. But the interesting thing is that he's got a little bit of making about him. So he kind of assembles out of the stuff he's got in his studio a rig that does something experimental, which I quite like. But the important thing is that he's got a very nice way of presenting information. And I kind of feel that, in terms of temperament and tone and level of quietness and the editing pace, he's kind of putting videos out which are just that step above where I am at the moment. So I've been watching his stuff, really studying it and trying to get better off the back of that. So they're the things that have been grabbing my attention this week.
Nice.
Oh, Jimmy, what about you?
The main thing for me has been the finishing off Star Trek Picard, which has been an absolute journey. Back when I was in my sort of formative years, I was quite isolationist for a while, struggling with mental health problems and things like that. And the crew of the Enterprise with Star Trek Next Generation were there for me for quite a lot of time. And this recent series of Star Trek Picard has kind of wrapped up the story entirely, and it's kind of put the full stop at the end, which is was a wonderful journey for me to go through. And I know it's had some phenomenal feedback from a lot of other people. Which
It's been a great series, really.
really
I think they were hampered a little bit by everything being locked down.
Yes.
So the second series, I think, was a little weaker. But yeah, I would agree. I mean, when I think back to my formative years, we're probably about the same sort of age, I guess. Star Trek Next Generation would come on. It'd be the first time out for it. Beyond 2000 would be on after it on the telly. And, that's kind of stuck with me, really. I really did lap it up. It did look like a proper show to me back then. And when Voyager came out, honestly, that was all we were talking about at work for weeks, really. Voyager. And then obviously it's not like a streaming service these days, right? You have to stop watching it for 12 months.
Wait for the next. Yeah.
We can watch it again. Exactly. Yeah. That's cool. I like that.
That's been the main bit of impact for me this week. But this weekend I've been doing a bit more prep for Maker Central, for the Make with Makers stuff. And making a dent in a bit of the outside, sort of trying to give myself a fighting chance at doing a bit of work out there, patching up some of the damage to the roof where cats from the local neighbourhood have been jumping on and off it and making holes in the roof and things. So
yeah,
it's only corrugated plastic stuff, but a bit of maintenance outside.
Yeah, I think we'd need to. We need an entire podcast on its own for me to go through my issue with neighbours' cats.
Yeah. Some of them are lovely. There's one who's an absolute pain in the backside.
I mean, the best cats, I think, are the ones that are so far away they never make it to my house. They're the best cats. I love them. All of them. Universally. If you're in San Francisco and got a cat, it's the best cat in the world. Because it's not going to be in my back garden tomorrow.
Leaving little parcels in the lawn.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
There's one who's just really, really cocky little sod. So he knows, and he wanders through from a few doors down, and he'll just wander through, and he'll just stop, and he'll just look at you, and then off he goes. And there's a very aged lurcher next door who she's probably 16 or something like that. But the second she sees him, she's straight out there. And he knows. Yeah. Anyway, how about you, Andy? What's been grabbing your attention?
I think it's been grabbing my attention this week. Had a haircut, as you can probably see. Well overdue.
Fine haircut it is too.
Yeah, it's well overdue. I
think there's a certain age you reach where a haircut is a good day out.
Yeah.
You can forget standing in a field with glow sticks in welly boots, right? A good haircut, nice sit down, a chat.
Yeah. And no queue. I do that. The trick is to go in the rain on a weekday rather than on a Saturday afternoon.
Oh, absolutely.
Rain
that's
on a
the joys
weekday.
of working from home.
Yeah.
I can say that
exactly.
now because everybody at work will be hopefully tucked up in bed and not watching this.
Started making a little bit of progress on my treasure trade for Full Tools Treasure Trade.
Very nice. Very nice.
not much, but some progress, and I've got some more mapped out. Still been tidying the Tinkerage, still been tidying the men's shed and putting organisers there. Did a bit more teaching this week at the men's shed, and that's likely to up the what's happening. So I actually went in on an extra day for the men's shed to do more organisation because it's not finished. But teaching others how to use tools, quite enjoyable, really. Yeah, it's sort of certain.
Have you ever thought about going into teaching, Andy?
Well, there's a thought. Yeah, you'd be a teacher. But it was an interesting one this week. Actually, it kind of really hit the heartstrings. One of the fairly newer members sort of was asking somebody else if there was somebody who could teach him how to make dovetails. Now, I think there's only one guy, and there may be some others, but there's only one guy that I know of that hasn't been around for a while, although he actually came on Thursday. So we're like, kind of said, "Oh, can you have a chat with him?" So I had a chat. I don't know how to make dovetails. It's one thing I want to do one day. It's not easy. You know, we have a jig, but no one's used it yet. We don't even know if it's complete. What do you want to make? He said, "Well, I want to make a box." Okay, well, there's some other ways of making boxes. We could do finger joints. We haven't got a jig for that, but it'd be easy enough to set up a jig for that, and we could do just mitered corners. That could look nice. And we could add some splines, and that would give them a bit of strength and whatever. And so what material do you think they're using? So I'm thinking using oak. Okay. And after a bit of a conversation and kind of a bit of explanation about kind of table saws, because he didn't know what a table saw was. It was like, okay, well, you're obviously really keen about making this box. It turned out, hadn't done any woodwork for 70 years. I mean, it shows his age. What's the box for? And he said, it was like, it's for my wife's ashes. And it's just like, okay, yep. Tuesday, I'll start teaching you how to do woodwork. We'll make you a box. So we've sorted him out with some oak, and we've sorted him. There's obviously plenty of things like pine and stuff. So we'll start with pine. I've got some oak that you can use just for kind of practice on hardwood, and then we'll do a fine one. It was just like, I mean, it's partly what men's sheds are about, but it was just like, plucking at the heartstrings or what. It was just like, okay, I'm not quite sure what to say about that one, but that's gonna be a good one, I think. So
it must be really rewarding teaching adults in particular skills that just pass them by.
Yeah,
I think a lot of time
it's forgotten. Yeah, sometimes they've just never done it, or they've forgotten it. Or I mean, we've got another chap. Yeah, he's been doing quite a lot of making. I mean, some guys turn up, they just want to chat and a coffee. And some guys, they want to do like me. They want to be mostly in the workshop. I got one chap. Yeah, he's a really nice guy. Trained as a carpenter when he was apprentice. Did a lot of kind of roofs and things like that. But until he came to the men's shed, he'd never used some of the power tools, because when he trained as a carpenter, he didn't have power tools.
No,
they just didn't have them. Everything was done by hand. There was no, there wasn't. You didn't even have the kind of sort of skill saws. Everything was cut by hand, and you'll still sometimes you'll see him sort of ripping a piece of plywood in down with a hand saw. It's just like, we could put the table saw, or we could use the band saw, or we could use the circular saw. It'd be a lot quicker. Like, but it's what he's used to. He'll grab a hand plane before he'll grab something that's powered. And it's nice to see that, and it's nice to sort of have the conversation. But it's also, like you say, it's really nice to sort of show people who have either just not had that opportunity, or one of the guys I've been teaching the last couple of weeks. He did a course about 10 years ago where he made a chopping board, and he wants to make another chopping board. And it's like, it's just like reminding him that sort of and there's a certain responsibility as well to kind of make sure that the tools are going to be used properly, and from the point of view of protecting the tools, but of course for protecting them as users. A table saw doesn't bother a table saw whether it's a piece of wood or whether it's your fingers.
No. My saw terrifies me most days.
It's a good position to be in a table saw.
I mean, before I was a teacher and when I was working in industry, I was using a couple of Watkins. One was just a good size cabinet saw. The other one was a huge panel saw. And if I think back to the stuff I was doing on those, yeah, literally fingers millimeters away from the blades sometimes, and it terrifies me to think about it. I certainly wouldn't or couldn't do it now.
Yeah.
I certainly went through a phase. I got rid of my own table saw to make space for my lathe just a little while ago, and I hadn't used it in 5 or 6 years, and I didn't want to use it either. Yeah, it wasn't it was cheap. I bought it secondhand. It wasn't. We've got a nice Metabo at the men's shed, and it's much nicer, much safer, in my opinion, than the thing I got rid of. Not that it's actually much different. It's just a bit more solid, a little bit bigger. But it's just, yeah, it's obviously we've got to protect the users and we have to protect the equipment because from damage. But just giving the people, sort of saying, I'm like, one day I taught them how to use the table saw, compound miter saw, drill press. I've also taught him how to use a scroll saw. A bunch of tools that he's not used in a while or before, in some cases.
Yeah, I mean that's Karl Pope is doing quite a lot of courses with people in his area. I think he lives in the Hull, Beverley kind of space in Yorkshire. And you see nothing but smiles in the Instagram pictures of people holding up, and it's not an insult, but quite basic builds that they've made themselves, and they absolutely
but that's the key phrase, isn't it? They made themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that is just so. I mean, if I think back to the first thing I made with my dad, it was something to hang his keys on when he got home, and all it was a bit of pine tongue and groove with the groove, the grooves planed off. That's the bit that I did, and a cup hook screwed in it with keys written in it in my 10-year-old scroll. I loved it. That's still at my mum's house. It's still there. And it is the making it yourself. I think that's a key thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And the last thing that for this week, I've been binge listening to ADH Big Brother. It's a podcast that was recommended by Adam Savage. Which apparently at the time that happened, it kind of there was this sudden surge in view of listens rather and downloads.
It's funny that
you mentioned Adam Savage's channel, but it's specifically aimed at adults with ADHD.
Interesting,
and particularly those with maybe a comorbidity of depression as well. And give kind of coping strategies. They're all really short, which I think I've got about 10. There's about 75, 80 episodes, and I think I've got about 10 left. And I've pretty much binged the part because they're all 15 minutes. I think there's one that's longer than 15 minutes. And so it's just if 1.7 times speed as well. I listened to a bunch. Yesterday, working on the Tinkerage, it was just like several hours of it, just one after another. But some really interesting points, and very much for me, not officially diagnosed. I was very much kind of going, recognise that, recognise that, recognise that as well, and that, and that.
That's called ADHD Big Brother.
Yeah. Yes. Somebody just in the chat.
Just found it.
So just popping that in the chat, the comments, so people can see that. It'll be in the show notes as well tomorrow. So definitely one to recommend.
Taking a listen for sure.
Yeah. Karl, where's the best places for people to find you?
Oh, so you can. One of the unique things about my channel name, Strawbyte, is that for quite a while it was a Google whack, right? In the sense that you stick it into Google and basically you only found me. So you can put Strawbyte. It's on the screen, STRAWBYTE. into any search engine and you'll find all of my social media platforms. But it's the Strawbyte Workshop on YouTube and Instagram, and strawbyte.com is my website. That's it.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
I've really enjoyed it. I can't believe
Yeah.
I've spoken for so long, to be honest. I haven't spoken to my other half much all day because I've been in the workshop. So she's going to be pretty cheesed off, I think, really, about how long I've been yakking to you guys, really.
Well, I'm guessing she's enjoyed it by the fact that she's
Well, I hope so.
turned the light back on for you.
I'll find out in 5 minutes, won't I?
Thank
It's
you
been
for
great.
running
I've
into
really
it.
enjoyed it, and I've been looking forward to this all week. So thank you for making my week much
Thank you for coming
brighter.
on. Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.
All right.
On that note, we'll say goodbye to folks. So thank you, folks.
Indeed.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will.
Cheery bye.
Bye.
Bye.